Yeah, it looks so. Yeah, it started. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ravindranath Goswami, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for this evening's proceedings. Welcome to our distinguished panelists. We are very grateful for each panelist having agreed to participate and to give of their time and expertise in today's discussion. Welcome to all attendees in Trinidad and Tobago, the wider Caribbean, as well as globally that are viewing the live stream via YouTube. We certainly appreciate your company this evening. Please feel free to share the live. This event is being recorded and will be made available for subsequent review, as well as to facilitate persons who are not able to attend this evening. Today's virtual panel discussion coincides with two very significant events being observed during the month of May. React Month is celebrated internationally by all React teams to recognize the efforts of membership and their achievements and to have a forward-looking view for the organization. Just to note, last year in 2022, React International Incorporated, headquartered in Glendale, California, celebrated its 60th anniversary. The NDPPM, or the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month, as declared by the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and executed by several stakeholders, led by the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, ODPM, is also being observed in the month of May. React has had a long working relationship with the ODPM, and today's event is a manifestation of this close collaboration. We acknowledge the long-standing partnerships with the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, TTMET, as well as Heartlight TV, the streaming provider for today. REACT is the Radio Emergency Associated Communications Teams, a voluntary, non-profit organization that provides assistance in times of emergencies and disasters, working closely with first responder organizations and partners. Not only in crisis times, the organization otherwise provides assistance for public service projects, including cultural, sporting, and other activities in which communications and logistics are critical success factors. Radio communication technology is the mainstay of the organization's operations. Continual preparation of its people via training, exercises, drills, and projects form part of the organization's ethos. REACT works closely with several stakeholders, some of whom are represented on the panel this evening, as the organization pursues its role in disaster risk reduction. It is by no accident that REACT Month activities in Trinidad and Tobago and that of the NDPPM occur just before the official start of the Atlantic hurricane season, more of which we shall surely hear about this evening from our subject matter experts. We, as global citizens, have a key role to play in disaster risk reduction. Planning, strategizing, exercising, drilling, training, collaborating, cooperating, and having such discussions as we are about to engage are all part of our readiness in order to minimize the impact of the many hazards we face. Whether it's hurricanes, earthquakes, terrorism, pandemics, cybersecurity vulnerabilities, or other hazards, we must have an all hands on deck, all hazards, and all of society approach. Collaboration and cooperation among agencies and stakeholders are therefore critical. Arising out of discussions with the NDPPM Secretariat the previous year, led by the CEO of the ODPM, Major General Retired Rodney Smart, and Operations Manager Dennis Marcel, REACT is pleased once again to partner with the ODPM for a third year in hosting today's virtual panel discussion, the role of weather in being disaster ready. The topic of weather and the associated matters of climate variability, climate change, climate resilience are without a doubt of great interest to all of us that inhabit this earth. Such a discourse would not only be of great interest to weather enthusiasts and environmentalists, but each and every one of us as citizens in the global village. Climate change is perhaps the biggest challenge that faces us, and this was enunciated at the recent COP27 forum. Sustainability is a key topic in both private and public sector conversations. Heat extremes, unusual rainfall, sea level rise affect especially those of us that live in small island developing states. This forum presents an opportunity to discuss this critical issue of weather and the relationship to our responsibility in being disaster ready from the perspective of our panelists, who are all practitioners and eminently qualified to speak on such matters. The multidisciplinary panelists with diverse backgrounds and experiences bring a wealth of knowledge that no doubt will make for an interesting and thought-provoking exploration of the matter. We may indeed get into some controversial subtopics as we explore the various facets of weather and being disaster ready. Attendees may send in questions to the panel via SMS text or WhatsApp to the number 1-868-74-REACT, that is 747-3228 at any time. That number should run as a ticker tape on your screen throughout the program. We welcome your questions, even hard questions. Should we encounter any major technical difficulties or other issues that affect the program, we will attempt to recover. However, if we are unable to do so within 5 minutes, we will seek to reschedule. In terms of our proceedings, each panelist shall be introduced, followed by a short presentation of their thoughts regarding our topic for the evening, that is, the role of weather in being disaster ready. Each panelist will select the perspective from which they choose to approach the discussion. After all panelists have made their opening statements, we shall engage the panel in some further conversation, followed by questions from the attendees. We encourage you to ask questions or make comments. Please note that we will be proceeding in some ways quite informally throughout the evening. We trust that you will find this evening's discourse interesting, thought-provoking, and one that will generate onward discussion. Let's now hear from our distinguished panelists. First up, Kalain Hosein is a multimedia journalist based in Trinidad and Tobago. Since 2014, he has reported on weather, climate, and the environment for his online media company, Trinidad and Tobago Weather Center. In 2019, he joined Guardian Media Limited in Trinidad and Tobago as their weather anchor, producing compelling weather, climate, and environment coverage across television, print, digital, and radio. Hosein has led Guardian Media's coverage through inclement weather events like tropical cyclones and floods, as well as international climate conferences such as the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP27. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Kalain leveraged his skills with data, bringing another layer of pandemic coverage and analytical data journalism to Trinidad and Tobago. He has a deep interest in climate change and nature conservation journalism, as well as in using data in explanatory reports to link the weather we experience to the long-term trends of our now changing climate. Let us welcome Kalain Hosein.
Thank you very much, Robbie, for that introduction. So I'll just jump right into my statement because I know we will be running short on time with this discussion later today. So, as a weather forecaster, I can tell you that weather forecasting plays a critical role in disaster preparedness and response. Accurate and timely weather forecasts allow emergency management officials, like from all the way down from councillors to the disaster management units, a municipal corporation, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, the ODPM, all the way up to the National Security Council in Trinidad and Tobago, and the public alike, to prepare and respond for potential disasters, including severe storms, hurricanes, floods, and all the other natural disasters we experience or hazards we experience in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, weather forecasts provide the information of potential hazards such as heavy rainfall, strong winds, and dangerous waves, which can help the public and emergency responders take the appropriate actions to minimize damage and loss of life. And it can range anywhere from securing boats in the event of hazardous seas to securing outdoor property in high winds and taking all action to protect lives, livelihoods, and property in the event of multi-day rainfall events that have proved devastating in the past. Now, in addition to forecasting, forecasters also play a crucial role in analyzing weather data to identify the different patterns and trends that may signal the onset of severe weather events. For instance, in Trinidad and Tobago, by analyzing weather data, we can identify, and disaster officials as well can identify areas that would be the highest risk of flooding and can help officials take measures to reduce the impacts of potential floods. But these efforts could be majorly or are usually majorly affected by the proliferation of inaccurate news originating from non official sources. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, by my count, we have at least 30 Facebook pages and groups that spread such misinformation when it comes to specifically weather information. And given how much of the population in Trinidad and Tobago get their news from Facebook, but also from WhatsApp, where by my counts as well, we have about 20 WhatsApp groups specifically for weather. That spread of inaccurate or outright fake news can instill baseless panic. And for example, outside of the last week of April this year in Trinidad and Tobago and across the Eastern Caribbean, we had a very dry start to the year. But yet, every couple of weeks, we would see a YouTube video or Facebook post calling for incoming flooding in the middle of the dry season. Now, last year, we had social media actors calling for life threatening rains and flooding. We have some social meteorologists with sizable followings on social media using their dreams to guide their amateur forecasting, and then that spreads like wildfire. And this list can go on and on. And these cry wolf situations not only desensitizes the population to legitimate weather hazards, but will eventually lead to a less prepared population when disaster actually strikes. But overall, reliable weather forecasting and analysis from trusted official sources are critical components of disaster preparedness and response. And weather forecasters and meteorologists play a critical role in providing accurate and timely weather information to the public and emergency responders. Thank you.
Excellent indeed. Thank you so much, Kalain, for your opening statement. And, a couple of takeaways. I mean, you said quite a bit there, but a few things that resonated, certainly, as we have seen fake news, especially with the onslaught of social media as a technology, has really affected all of us. And we took note that poor information can lead to lives being lost, us being less prepared, and the importance of reliable and accurate forecasts, which are what the panelists this evening here are involved in. So important that you mention that we all need to be very careful about fake news when we pay attention to reports. Okay, excellent. So up next for opening statement will be Eric Mackie. He is a regional coordinator with the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, ODPM, and has been a staff member for 14 years. He is the ODPM and country representative to the Tsunami and Other Coastal Hazard Warning System for the Caribbean and adjacent regions, as in Caribbean EWS project. He also has extensive knowledge of Caribbean weather and has been a weather anchor, first with TV6 and subsequently CNC3 for a total of 12 years. He is also a senior amateur radio operator, or ham as they are sometimes called, and has provided emergency communications for incidents in the past. Pleasure to introduce Eric Mackie. Over to you for your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Robbie, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, this is quite an interesting topic this afternoon because I don't think too many people pay too much weather before something happens. And that could be detrimental depending on what it is that you have planned. But to take a realism here, for example, in the military, one of the most important aspects of any operation is the weather. The first thing they do is look at the weather before they plan anything else. They look at what is anticipated to be and plot the whole scenario depending on what sort of weather situation they're going to encounter in the field, you know, and that gives you a pretty good idea of how important weather is and when you're preparing to do anything major, especially outdoors. You know, you should pay a close attention to the weather, especially during the wet season or hurricane season. As everyone knows, we can get these sudden, very sudden microbursts and thunderstorm activity and stuff that can create significant problems in a specific area. We have a bit of a unusual situation in that we have very small thunderstorms happening, but these small thunderstorms can be especially violent. They have strong gusty winds in them and torrential rainfall and lots of lightning and thunder, and they affect a small area. You can have it where much of the island or the islands are inundated with heavy weather. But then again, you have other times in drier conditions where you have the moisture content in the atmosphere and the high daytime heating pops up these small areas of thunderstorm activity that can be every bit as violent as the bigger brothers, as it were. So that's it. Another area where weather is looked at closely is among the amateur radio fraternity. Within the Eastern Caribbean, we have a very active amateur radio fraternity throughout all the islands. The entire island chain has radio amateurs, licensed radio amateurs on them, I should say. And we communicate all the time. We have a net called the Caribbean Emergency and Weather Net that runs every morning at 6:30 a.m. and again in the evening, again at 6:30 p.m. And one of the major functions of that net is to present weather, either forecasts or occurring in the islands. And then when a storm or hurricane is going through, um, the net is activated in extended session and they're passing information. A lot of it is weather related information as well, because we do also supply weather data to the National Hurricane Center. The National Hurricane Center has a complete its own amateur radio station there, and they can communicate with us as needed during the passage of a storm or a hurricane, so that they can get data from us, live data from the scene, ground zero, as it were. So, and basically, that's it for that. Um, I don't think I have anything much more to say at this point in time. I don't want to say too much and then leave nothing for the other two presenters. So let me turn it back to you, Rob, and you'll carry on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jess. Indeed, Eric, and we appreciate the brevity as well. Yes, much to discuss. And I mean, a lot of takeaways from what you said there, Eric, noted the importance of paying attention to weather before you do anything, whether it's at a personal level or corporate level, military. I mean, it's like Boy Scouts, always be prepared. And that's really what everyone checks before doing anything, or what we should weather. And that, I suppose, is what makes us to be aware of our surroundings, what we can expect. But you did mention that sometimes, notwithstanding, there can be these certain microbursts and other things as well. And important, another takeaway is the contribution by the amateur radio fraternity and community in terms of monitoring weather and reporting to the National Hurricane Center. So very good takeaway from your opening statement there, Eric. And we now come to our third panelist. Brian Shields is the meteorologist behind the YouTube channels Mr. Weatherman and Earth QC. He works as a broadcast meteorologist at WFTV in Orlando, Florida. Brian has decades of experience forecasting weather and covering natural disasters. He holds a degree in geography from Villanova University and a degree in broadcast meteorology from Mississippi State University. He also holds university certificates in emergency management and volcanology. Safety is his number one priority. So we welcome Brian Shields.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you can hear me okay. I appreciate you having me as part of this panel. I'm honored to be here with such a great group of panelists. I was really listening to what each had to say. Just such good information to pass along. As far as my opening statement goes, I would talk about our responsibilities as meteorologists. And one thing, we could spit out data all the time. A storm's coming, a hurricane's coming. We could tell you the winds, we could tell you the rain, and we could tell you, the ins and outs of the science behind it. But what does that mean for you? If you're at home, if you're with your family, how does it impact you? I think it's very important that we focus on that, not just, hey, the winds are going to be this, but that means, I could lose the roof of my home in specific things, or, I usually walk to get water in the morning and I may not be able to do so, tomorrow and the next day. So to really make it more relatable. Also, I think it's important, especially this part of the season, there's a lot of those seasonal forecasts out there, kind of, hey, this will be an active hurricane season, or this will be a quiet hurricane season. And there is good science behind the seasonal forecast, so I'm not disregarding that. But as far as when it reaches everyone else, it's always taken out of context. This season, for example, we're headed toward an El Nino, and that is typically a quieter season. But there's also factors that may make it a not so quiet season. And the point is, we don't know where a storm's going to go to develop. So there could be two storms out there in a season, and that's a quiet season. But if both end up hitting you, then it's not so quiet to you. So it's really relative. So I think it's our job as a meteorologist to really kind of give that good information and put it into context, what a seasonal forecast means. Now, as a viewer, I think it's important to know the source. The reason I started my YouTube channel, Mr. Weatherman, and my new YouTube channel, Earth QC, is because of the misinformation on WhatsApp. There's a ton of information, and you heard it from our panelists as well, a lot of misinformation out there. So it's hard to sometimes know, and I understand that. It is important, though, to make sure you know the source, know it's a trusted source. And there's a way you could kind of combat that as well by spreading good information. If you know a good source, like sources from our panelists here, spread their sources out there because they're trusted. These are very smart individuals on here, very smart panelists. Use their sources, put their sources out there so it could kind of block out some of that bad noise out there. Lastly, I just want to say during, a hurricane season or when there's bad weather, please be there for each other. Check on, somebody who's a village or town or city over that may not have anybody. So a lot of anxiety comes out of storms. That's why one of the reasons weather is such a big thing, it impacts everyone. So please, before a storm comes, think about, hey, that person may be alone during this storm. What can I do to help? I think that's always my fear that, folks are out there alone and scared and, we can always reach out and help others. So that's it for me. I know we need to get on to much smarter people than me.
Excellent indeed. And again, important contribution, opening statement. You spoke a bit about the misinformation and a way that we can counteract, and that is by, spreading a lot of correct and good information. So that's a takeaway, certainly for me here, that could hopefully overshadow or drown out that bit of misinformation. You talked a bit about the upcoming Atlantic hurricane season and the El Nino. And I think that will be one of the things we want to explore a little further with the panelists in terms of what to expect. So important, I think, that you raise that as one of the concerns. And I heard you say that, as meteorologists, you produce a lot of data, you have a lot of readings and parameters, but what really matters is how does that affect us? What is the impact? How does and make it relatable? So I think that is an important factor because meteorology to a lot of us as regular citizens is, mysterious. So it's good to know that, there's that focus on making it relatable and how it can affect us as well. And another takeaway I heard there is about looking out for each other. So in a nutshell, very good contribution. We do appreciate it. So up next, our fourth panelist, and Gary Benjamin started in the field of meteorology with the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service in 1981, first as a weather observer and eventually a meteorologist, aeronautical meteorologist, synoptic analyst, and weather forecaster. He has considerable experience in analyzing and predicting the state of the atmosphere in WMO's Region 4. He is also trained in basic climatology and agro-meteorology. Gary has done several FEMA courses in emergency management, for example, NIMS, ICS, emergency planning, etc. He is trained in CERT and is a licensed amateur radio operator. He possesses a technician diploma in telecommunication systems and a BSc Information Technology, UWI. Gary is a member of Radio Emergency Associated Communications Teams, REACT. He is presently employed with the TTMS as a meteorologist based mostly in the communications department and also performs duties at the synoptic branch as well. We now welcome Gary Benjamin for his opening statement.
Because they are thinking the same as us. What I find over the years is that meteorologists are usually in agreement with each other because we know the science well. We are in close agreement generally with what is going on, and the information has to get out. Now, the headline is the role of weather in being disaster ready. And to respond directly to that, weather plays, of course, a very important role, a very critical and crucial role that you would have already heard from the panelists before myself. Not only is it important in the preparation stages of disaster management, but it is also important in all stages of disaster management. For instance, prevention, preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. The weather may not be the threat per se or the cause of the disaster, but it should always be considered. It informs the type of skill responders would have to use. It informs the type of equipment that would be necessary if responders has to go to respond to some disaster and help people. In order to safely negotiate all the stages of the disaster management, the weather plays an important role, again, as the others have said before me. Down to the clothes and the communication equipment. For instance, if it's raining, your communication equipment must be able to be rigid enough to withstand the weather, otherwise it makes no sense. And the type of assistance you would need even to give to those affected by the disaster. Is the disaster occurring in flooded areas? Is it in heavy rainfall, very hot sunshine, very cold conditions, high winds, land slippages, etc., even dust and Saharan dust, because you may be going on a rescue and there are people who are affected by the Saharan dust, and you may have to understand you need to take breathing apparatus to help them. In Trinidad and Tobago, most times the cause of our disasters or events is usually the result of the weather. And for that, it makes it even more critical as we understand the weather, to understand the weather and the climate, the season, the day-to-day events, and the variations can occur, because you heard Eric talk about the micro scale events. And in meteorology, the synoptic events like tropical waves and cyclones and even the ITCZ is one thing, but Trinidad and Tobago, the size of our islands, even in the Lesser Antilles, are very small, and we could in fact be affected by high microscale, low mesoscale events such as the thunderstorms that Eric talked about. I even wrote a paper on those types of thunderstorms a couple of years ago. So besides threats from cyclones, as I said, it is great concern to the individuals involved, because we may have a weather situation occurring in Trinidad or Tobago, and it may in one thunderstorm affect one village, but even the 20 or 25, 30 families in that village, it is a complete disaster for them. So that we must be concerned with that at all times. I would not say too much, but except to say that communications itself is as important, because we want to have a proper and precise information passing so that people could respond appropriately. And sometimes there is a problem, as far as Kalain said and the other panelists mentioned, with getting the real information to the people who need it dearly. And sometimes it put a type of psychological blockage to the communication channels when we have all this proliferation of anecdotal, what I call anecdotal and factoidal type of information that people just saying anything they feel like, and their listeners are coming to believe it, and in that way they are miseducated as far as the weather is concerned and meteorology. So I'll just stop there and leave it up to the questions so that we could get into it. But once again, I appreciate being on this panel this evening, and I hope we have a fruitful discussions.
Excellent indeed, Gary, and what a mouthful indeed. I mean, you touched on many things. You went through talking about the emergency management cycle, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and how all of that is affected certainly by weather. You must be aware of the weather, must always be considered, as what you have shared with us. And you have mentioned it more than once in your contribution, of the importance of communication and communication equipment to make sure it's resilient, and not just the equipment, but our ability to communicate. And very loud and clear, I think that is well highlighted for us. And also, I think you mentioned that sometimes if there's a small area that's affected, it could be a disaster for those citizens who in that small area are affected. So we need to be mindful of that when we look at the picture. And those affected families, when suffering is suffering, it's whether it's on a large scale or a small scale. So I think what I'm hearing is, as meteorologists, you all consider that, and you use some terms, microscale and mesoscale. So maybe we could expand on that a little bit later on as to what those terms exactly mean. You mentioned a paper as well, and it would be great if you can share that with us, the audience. I'm sure people who are viewing, we have quite a large audience, and many of whom are perhaps even budding meteorologists themselves and would like to access these academic papers. And the last point that you made, talked about anecdotal evidence or anecdotal statements, people who, may not actually have any proper information, but they may be sharing things. And I'm hearing that throughout the thread, whether it's Kalain, Eric, Brian, and Gary. I think you all touched as panelists and are concerned about fake news or information that is not substantiated or quite accurate. So that is coming out loud and clear. And perhaps one of the things, you talk about information for meteorologists. We'd like to find out a little bit about that Doppler radar. I'm sure that's a question that may come up a little later on, right? The TNP Doppler radar. So folks, you have heard from our panelists. They have all given their opening remarks, their topic statements, and what a great job indeed. They have opened our appetite for further exploration and for further information. So at this time, we will ask for participants to consider sending in your questions. You can do so via text message. The number is 1-868-74-REACT. That's the number that you're texting, either SMS text or WhatsApp to. There should be a ticker tape shortly on your screen, and you can send in your questions that way. Right, so I think it's running. Feel free to send in SMS text or WhatsApp message. In the meantime, while we wait on your questions, actually, I think I'm seeing some questions coming in already via WhatsApp. We do have a couple of questions for the panelists, and of course, we'll ask the question, and any panelist can choose, more than one can choose to respond. So let's go with a couple of questions for our panelists. The first question that we have is, tell us, what are some of the factors that weather professionals have to take into account to prepare a weather forecast? Would any of our panelists like to take a stab at that question? What are the factors, or some of the factors, that as weather forecasters, weather professionals, you have to take into account to prepare a weather forecast? In other words, how do you go about preparing a weather forecast? What do you look at?
Well, okay, Robbie. I'll take a stab at it first, but that does not rule out anybody else contributing.
Sure, Gary.
My short take is this, that first of all, the weather forecaster has to understand certain things about the state of the climate. And he starts looking, I would start looking at the bigger picture. What season we in, what is the climatology? We're hearing people talking about climate change. So we're looking at all those issues and what normally is the climatology. And then we have that information, and we bring it down a little closer to see what has been the state of the atmosphere over the recent past. And then we make a timeline. I would make a timeline to see what is happening, if there is going to be some variability, because in Trinidad and Tobago we may have one synoptic event coming through. Because of the shape and orientation of that event, it may cause variations in the local weather, and so you look at that, you build a timeline, and one of the things forecasters need to do is to always observe the weather themselves. Go outside, take a look, because I've been trained in looking at the clouds and do what is called a visual sounding of the atmosphere, where we send up balloons, but I could look at the clouds and see how the clouds are either releasing its moisture to the atmosphere, how the atmosphere is affecting it. And I can have an idea if it is going to be building or not, and having the knowledge of the area that you have. So when you have all that information and that historical account, you must now come and consider what is the state of the present weather. And then you have all these numerical models now that you can look at. Before, I used to analyze maps by hand and actually draw the maps, old style. But now you have the numerical models. So you do a projection into the future, and you look at what is most likely to occur, what is the highest probability. But also you look at the things, what might give you the greatest impacts. So it's not just even if a thunderstorm might have a low probability, we still would mention it because it could have an impact if it does occur. So you would hear us saying a 30% chance of a thunderstorm over western areas or something like that, because we understand the state of the atmosphere and the country in which we are forecasting for. So that is just a timeline we build. We look at the big picture and we scale it down to the area in which we need to forecast for.
Okay, excellent indeed, Gary. Thanks for taking a stab at that question and give us that explanation. Would any other panelists would like to take a stab at that question? What you look at as a forecaster to make a forecast?
Hey, can I jump in? First off, that was great. I also think limitations are a factor. We also have to know our limitations as far as how well we can forecast rapid intensification in hurricanes, for example. There's track forecasts are a lot better than intensification forecasts, intensity forecasts. So just to know that, so we know how to kind of tailor our wording, how to properly prepare people. The storm looks like, maybe a category 1, but there are, a couple of elements out there that, we need to watch out for. Just nothing saying it's going to be a category 3, but, we've seen a history of this, or, it's going over very, very warm water. So just to know some of our limitations, I think is important as well, and then how we present that to the viewer.
Excellent indeed. So adding to the compendium of things that have to go into a forecast. Any other panelists have anything that they would like to add in terms of what you look at? How do you forecast? What are some of the things you consider in preparing a forecast?
I can jump in here. So, I mean, Gary had a very comprehensive look at what goes into forecasting, and it takes a lot of time to do this. It's not just like a 5 minutes going outside watching the clouds and then coming back in and telling people it's going to be a sunny day. It's a lot of work that goes into it, and I think as professionals, sometimes we may get lost in the jargon. And remember, at the end user, it's the public. They may not necessarily have all the meteorological knowledge that we would have. So it's really ensuring that we use the simplest language possible to tell them the hazards that could potentially impact them tomorrow, and also making it about them. How is the weather that we are forecasting? How is it going to affect them? The potential impacts on both the most likely scenario and, like Gary actually mentioned, what could be the sort of not necessarily worst case, but the end cases of the probabilities that we could experience over the next day.
Okay, thanks very much, Kalain. Again, everyone is adding, almost like a layer of the cake as we go. So anyone else, well, I guess it's left to you, Eric. I guess we can ask for your bit as well. I'm sure you have something to add.
Well, I think it's all been pretty much said already, but like Gary, I like to look at the sky first thing in the morning. As soon as it's light enough outside, I go outside and gape around at the surrounding atmosphere. And I don't have quite the kind of knowledge and experience that he has in reading the clouds and so on. But I do have some knowledge. So I use the knowledge that I do to give me an idea of what I could expect in the next couple of hours. But besides that, as Gary said, now there are the numerical models and stuff like that help a great deal. But the first chart that I look at every morning is a chart, a surface chart from the National Hurricane Center of the entire Atlantic Basin. I'm looking at everything that's going on inside there, right? Because it might not affect us directly, but it could affect us indirectly. So I take a look and get an appreciation for what's happening, and then I move on from there. I look at their forecast for the sea state, and then I go and I look at the satellite animation. I use Windy for that, and I also use Windy to show me various other things: the forecast, wind speed and direction, the sea state, that sort of stuff. And then I also use tropical tidbits. Tropical tidbits supplies the numerical models that I look at. And so every morning on a normal dry season day, right, I might spend 3/4 of an hour just analyzing and compiling data to make a forecast. And by the way, I do a personalized forecast for the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Prevention every day, 7 days a week. So I always, though, Mr. Benjamin, and before before things get heated. I also supply the latest forecast from Met alongside my forecast, so that we don't have any issues with that. All right. Yeah. So lots of different things that you look at the upper level conditions, the low level conditions. You compare the two of them. You look at where the troughs and so on are, because the troughs are important. If there's a trough over you, depending on whether it has conditions are favorable for the trough to bring rainfall, then you look at that. And one of the most important things for me is looking at the amount of precipitable water in the atmosphere, both over Trinidad and Tobago and in the Atlantic out to the east, because what's in the Atlantic out to the east is coming towards us. And when there's a significant amount of precipitable water, you could bet your bottom dollar it's going to rain. And depending on how heavy the amount of significant water is how heavy the rainfall is going to be. So lots and lots of stuff to look at every day. And then when you get into the hurricane season now, you have the additional data input with the tropical waves and the tropical storms and the hurricanes and so on. So it can be quite challenging at times to get it all together, but we do our best. Thanks, Ravi.
Oh,
And
excellent indeed,
Robbie,
Eric. Yes, Gary.
I just want to jump in here. I want to say this, and I think I alluded to it earlier on, and Eric reminded me that being a communications meteorologist for the Trinidad and Tobago Met Service, being a meteorologist, I have always looked to what other meteorologists around the region are saying. I've always looked to Miami. I even
Very
have
true.
Brian's YouTube coming in on my phone. I listen to Kalain sometimes when I have the TV available to me these days. I don't have much equipment available. But I try to listen to everyone and what they are saying, because as individuals, we cannot always pick up everything. And sometimes I hear an ex-meteorologist in the region mentioning something, and I take a look at it twice and I say, is that going to be a factor in my forecast? What have I to say about it, And it helps me to, whether I agree with it or not, it helps me to look in a particular direction in a more detailed and granular way. And therefore, meteorologists conferring and looking at what each other has to say is a great help to be able to produce an even more accurate forecast.
Okay,
I agree.
excellent indeed. Yeah. So, we are seeing some things converging here. I think, I think we have the right panel. It's so wide and varied, the perspectives, but we are seeing some convergence in what everyone has said so far. But a couple of themes that come out from the contributions made to answer the first question is that, one, it's not easy. Two, it's probably a combination of science and art. Three, it doesn't take 5 minutes. It takes quite some time. And then when it's over, you have to go and do it again. I also see that this is not something that one person alone can do as well. We have to reference. And so you guys probably have a very difficult task at hand based on how we have described your art form. That's why it's science and art, a combination indeed. So I think a very credible job our panelists have done with tackling our first question. And before we start to take some of the questions coming in from the online viewers, let us go into one other question that we have for the panelists that I'm sure we got a lot of comments earlier on before the session that participants who are looking on would want to answer. So let's go to question number 2 for our panelists. Again, just as before, one, some or all can choose to answer and add a perspective to it. So question number 2 for our panelists. What can we expect from the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season? So who would like to take that?
Tough
I'll jump in
question.
if nobody wants to. Yeah, that's. I'll jump in. I'll take a go at it if you want. If you know, I don't get anything thrown at me. First off, Gary, I think that says a lot about you as a person. That's a humbling thing you said before about you know, essentially looking at other sources and other meteorologists, because I miss stuff. You miss, you know, you start focusing on one thing and you miss out on another thing. So I thought that was very says a lot about you as a person and a forecaster. The hurricane season, again, we're trending to an El Nino. El Nino is getting locked in. There are signs that it could be a very significant El Nino pattern. We're just putting that science aside. What is El Nino? I don't think we have time. Maybe, you know, someone has a better summary of that for me than me. But in an El Nino season, there's a lot of wind shears, so you don't always see as many thunderstorms bubbling up, which means typically it's a quieter season. But with that said, like anything, that is one factor. That's a big factor, but that's still one factor. Right now, I was just looking at, I think it was yesterday, there are record warm water temperatures out there. And that's an issue too. So even if the numbers stay down, so say that works out, it stays down, the rapid intensification of the storms can be an issue. The ones that do develop can be an issue. Also, we have to look at things like Saharan dust, which is played big into the forecast lately. And to me, at least, maybe not to these smarter panelists, it's hard to kind of forecast that. That's kind of a very much of a wait and see how much dust is getting tied into this. So yes, there's a lot of chatter about a below average season. My best guess is I would be splitting the difference that, you know, we could have, you know, yes, El Nino is a big factor, but on the flip side, the water temps are so warm. And then I always know there's another factor that I'm missing that we're going to find out in about a month or two when things start to get going. So, you know, if I took a stab at it, it would be middle of the road forecast. But again, hurricane season forecast is probably my one pet peeve in weather, drive me nuts because it just takes one storm to come your way, and then it is a busy season for you. Or there could be 8,000 storms that stay in the ocean, and you would consider that a quiet season, even though it wasn't. There's a lot of storms. So it really has to do with the individual. I'll stop talking at this point.
Yeah,
Brian. I just presented the hurricane season forecast, and especially for Trinidad and Tobago yesterday. And already I am seeing much misinterpretations of what the forecast really is about, you know. And like Brian said, and we always stress this, that whether I have never seen Robbie and the panelists and everyone listening, I have never seen an El Nino year where they have had no hurricanes. So there must be other factors besides El Nino that would cause strong cyclones to develop. And like he said, we are looking at the temperature of the water itself, and that pushing from below could overcome the El Nino factor. El Nino is just a broad-based facilitator. But if you have these thunderstorms ready to develop, these cyclones ready to develop, we would have some, and the predictions are just close to normal. But we say normal as far as numbers. And again, once again, we are looking at, while it may be normal, if one hits you, just one alone in the island states, the size of Trinidad and Tobago and the Lesser Antilles, it could set us back for a number of years. And that would be a very active hurricane season for us with just one passing through. And we realized last year we even had a potential tropical cyclone, which didn't even touch down to the ground, but it went on to give some serious strong storm force winds across Grenada, and I believe they even had hurricane gusts. So even in a situation like El Nino, we still have to be on the lookout for even the one that could pass and affect any one of us.
Okay, excellent. So we have heard from Brian, we have heard from Gary. Any other takers as to what to expect for our 2023 Atlantic hurricane season?
I'll jump in here. So I mean, we have the seasonal forecasts from NOAA, Colorado State University, even the Met Office, but these are for named storms. And if we look back to 2022 in the Met Office's AOI, which is below 15 degrees north latitude between the Eastern Caribbean and Western Africa, we actually had no named storms form in that area. But we did have 3 tropical disturbances that eventually led to named storms move across or near Trinidad and Tobago, and that brought its own problems. So, like Brian and Gary, and I'm sure Eric would also say, it really only takes one system, not even a named storm, to bring some form of devastation to Trinidad and Tobago. We've seen it with the intertropical convergence zone, with troughs, with tropical waves, even singular thunderstorms causing some level of carnage in Trinidad. So even though some forecasts may say above, some forecasts may say below average activity, we should all be prepared as we head into the upcoming wet and hurricane season in Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, great. Well, Eric, again, everyone is taking a stab, so let me pull you out there as well to see what your take on, what's your expectation for this hurricane season? Have anything to add?
At this point in time, I think everything has just about been said. I can't think of anything different from what the other 3 panelists said before to add in at this point in time. So let's move on.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent indeed. So we have heard question number 2 about our Atlantic hurricane season for 2023, and there's convergence again in the comments from our panelists. A couple of things that came out very loud and clear from what they have said here is that no matter what happens, all it takes is something to bring bad weather for your local area, and then you have a huge issue. So whether or not it's many hurricanes, many tropical storms, El Nino in effect or not, you can have issues if you have a lot of rainfall. And we know that in Trinidad and Tobago, sometimes it's just a little sneeze and certain areas are under crisis, floodwaters, landslides, and so on. So I think based on that, we need to pay attention to those forecasts, pay attention to those alerts so that we can always be prepared and disaster ready. Okay, so that's it for 2 of the questions. And let us now take a look at some of the comments from our viewing audience participants. So let's go with them. Some of them are actually comments, some of them may have a question in there. So let's just take a look at this. All right, let's see here. All right, the first question is, please discuss if there are any measures in place to promote disaster resilience of businesses and ensure protection of the livelihoods affected by the recurrent flooding and adverse weather conditions. All right, let me just read it again, just to make sure we're clear on what the question is. Please discuss if there are any measures in place to promote disaster resilience of businesses and ensure protection of the livelihoods affected by the recurrent flooding and adverse weather conditions. All right. So I'm hoping a member of the panel understands that question and can give us a response.
That's up my alley, I think. All right.
Okay, Eric.
Well, first of all, this whole webinar this evening is part of the NDPPM month, the National Disaster Preparedness and Prevention month that is put on by the government of Trinidad and Tobago through the ODPM, right? This whole thing is aimed at educating the entire public, from the businessman come down to the low income householder, right? It's aimed at everybody, and to bring up the awareness of disaster management and disaster risk management and everything like that. So that's where that goes. Also, we also have business continuity management program in place, and I would ask the person that asked the question to kindly contact the ODPM at 640-1285. That's 640-1285, and we can discuss if you have issues with your business and business continuity. Please give us a call, and we can get somebody to help you out with it. Thanks, Robbie.
All right, excellent. Well, I think that's a very authoritative answer coming from the ODPM. And of course, we have that line that's available to the person who asked the question to call. So I don't know if anything further needs to be said on that question, as it were. So let's just go to another question from our participant. So let's go here. All right. So this is a bit of a long-winded comment. So let's just see if there's a question in there. It says, blessed evening, person has a name, so I'll avoid saying the name. I'm a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. I was really grateful to receive the email, and my focus is on how I can assist in helping communities and the environment in becoming a safe place in the rainy season. So I guess his question is, how can he works at the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, but clearly has a concern for community, and he wants to know how can he assist in helping his community and the environment in becoming a safe place in the rainy season.
Can I take that again?
Yeah, Eric, sure.
Okay, well, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government is in charge of the disaster management units of the 14 municipal corporations. Those disaster management units are mandated to run a CERT program, CERT. That program teaches people at the village level, at the community level, how to be self-reliant in the immediate aftermath of a earthquake or hurricane, a fire, whatever, you name it. So you're taught practical skills in order to be able to respond and help your neighbors in that sort of situation. Now, I'd suggest to the gentleman from the Defense Force that he get in touch with the disaster management unit for the municipal corporation in his area and volunteer his time and services with them.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much, Eric. I think you were spot on with the question. I don't believe there's any need for any further answer there. That should suffice. So let's just go to, so we have another question here. Right, and this is a technical question. What are the stages in the formation of a tropical cyclone, and what conditions must exist for each stage to progress? All right, so let's say again, what are the stages in the formation of a tropical cyclone, and what conditions must exist for each stage to progress?
It so happened that I have a paper right in front of me with the stages and how it develops, And again, anyone else could contribute. But you need to have, in the first instance, sufficiently warm sea surface temperatures. I think the figure is 26.5 degrees Celsius or greater. And it must be sufficiently warm and of a sufficient depth. And the minimum, I think, is 50 meters. Yes, 50 meters to maintain tropical cyclone activity. The layer must be deep to prevent cooler waters from coming up on there by stopping the heat, as it were, from the surface. There must be first what we call a pre-existent disturbance, atmospheric instability, which could be caused by surface heating, convergence, and things like that. So that pre-existence, existing disturbance begins to build with thunderstorms gathering together, and a deep layer of moist air with high humidity in the lower to middle levels of the atmosphere. And that is for greater vertical connectivity. Sometimes you must excuse me for using those terms, but I would explain them if anybody asks. But if you don't have that connectivity, you could have some evaporation in the middle levels and cutting off. And it must be, well, I'm saying must, but within recent times, I'm seeing storms forming, disturbances forming closer to the equator. But the science is that it should be far enough from the equator to have enough Coriolis force to sustain the spin around the low pressure center. And that is about 6 to some say 10 degrees north of the equator. Small vertical wind shear as you go up into the atmosphere, because we don't want to have that happening. And that is the case sometimes with the El Nino phenomena, you have that type of wind shear. So this is why the forecasters are saying that it may not have much development for cyclones because of the wind shear that the El Nino could produce. But with that small vertical wind shear, you have the development taking place, and then you have an exhaust, like an anticyclonic outflow in the northern hemisphere. Cyclonic flow is counterclockwise, and the anticyclonic outflow or system taken like an exhaust to the system. So the development of the tropical cyclone, or what they call cyclogenesis, is a number of thunderstorms finding favorable conditions coming together, because of course they were developing the areas that are more favorable for development. They come together and they cause what we consider a disturbance, and as they begin to develop, we have that air going up from the surface, lessening the pressure of the surface. You have the cross isobaric flow within close quarters, and then you have that cyclone beginning to spin and develop. So the cyclone itself, in to put it in a very simple way, is an organization of thunderstorms.
All right. Excellent indeed, Gary. Thanks for leading off that answer in terms of the various stages. Do we have any other panelists that would like to add anything to that question? Again, the question is, what are the stages in the formation of a tropical cyclone, and what conditions must exist for each stage to progress? So I think Gary gave us a very comprehensive answer. Are there any other contributions from any other panelists to that question before we move on?
I'll jump in here. Gary covered the science very comprehensively, so I'm not going to touch on that at all. But there's also the case of classification. A lot of times we would see tropical disturbances roll off the African coast. The National Hurricane Center would give it a probability of developing, and until this year it would have been a 5-day probability. This year they're actually shifting to a 7-day probability of tropical cyclone formation. And then in recent years, we would have seen the National Hurricane Center using the term potential tropical cyclone. What does that actually mean? Well, both disturbances that the National Hurricane Center tag and potential tropical cyclones are still tropical disturbances. The potential tropical cyclone designation, it means this tropical disturbance, it's approaching land, and this designation allows the National Hurricane Center, in conjunction with respective governments around the Caribbean, even in the United States, Central America, to begin issuing tropical cyclone watches and warnings for respective areas, even though the system may not have met all the criteria for it to become a tropical storm just yet. And the first instance it was actually used was back in 2017 when Tropical Storm Brett moved across Trinidad and Tobago. That was potential tropical cyclone 2. So these systems, we may get muddled, at least the public may get muddled when it comes to what exactly is it? Is it a storm? Is it a hurricane? But again, I'll go back to, it doesn't take a storm or a hurricane to cause devastation in our country and our neck of the woods.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, any other contributions before we move on?
Robbie, I just want to say that in order to further education of the listeners, is that cyclones in our part of the world are classified by their wind speed and wind strength. And once you have that closed circulation taking place, and the speed is lower than 38 miles, I'm using miles per hour here, right? 38 miles per hour, then you have a depression. And a depression is in fact a cyclone. And then you go on to the storm as the strength increases, and it gets between 39 and 73 miles per hour. And then as it increases again, it goes on to be a hurricane as you get above or equal to 74 miles per hour. And of course, when you get into the hurricanes, there's the Saffir simple scale of category 1 to 5. So again, Kalain alluded to it, that we may be speaking about certain types of weather, and you may hear a hurricane, a storm, a depression. They are all cyclones of different strengths as we categorize them. So, and all could be dangerous. And we see some of them with one of the important areas for generation of cyclones is in tropical waves. And a tropical wave itself could be strong. We have seen earlier on that the Met Office had called a tropical wave coming across with a low trajectory to Trinidad and Tobago last week or sometime like that, and no weather was produced out of it. Now, depending on the orientation of these waves and the wavelength with respect to the amplitude of the wave itself, then you have different strengths of wave, different strengths of weather happening along those waves. And you may have them, if it is tilted in the vertical or in the meridional, that is north to south, how it is tilted. You have different types of weather developing on different parts of the wavelength. And so we could have different strengths of tropical wave. And even if it were not classified as a cyclone, we could still have storm force type of weather coming out of the thunderstorms that may develop along a tropical wave. So that as we spoke about earlier on, it takes just one small to medium thunderstorm across Port of Spain to flood out the area and cause devastation. So that the tropical waves could develop into a depression, storm, and eventually a hurricane. So that's just for information for the people listening. So anytime you hear anything like that, it's to take it seriously. And sometimes we find that the weather has missed us, or the part of the arc of the wave has missed Trinidad and Tobago. But we have to warn you because of the possibility of the impacts that these systems could bring to us.
Excellent indeed. All right. So thanks very much to the panelists for addressing that question for us. Let me go to some of the questions that is coming through via SMS text. I will try to paraphrase because some of these questions are pretty lengthy. This one asks, actually it's a question for Mr. Weatherman, so I guess that's for you, Brian. You do a lot of forecasts for the Caribbean area, in particular Trinidad and Tobago and other islands. What is different about forecasting for our area in the Caribbean versus forecasting for weather in the United States?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think there's a few differences in I'll start with the United States. There seems to be we have a lot of meteorologists in the United States, and we don't have quite as many in the Caribbean. So there's a difference there. But you see on this panel, there's terrific meteorologists and people that are interested in weather and know about weather and put out some great information. Sometimes depending on which island, the tools can be different. In the United States, there are weather radars everywhere, and there's limitations to that across the Caribbean. And then also just from a perception, maybe that's not the right word, but from kind of a viewership type of perspective, there's a lot of folks, and I have a lot of friends across the Caribbean, that when there's a tropical system coming, a tropical storm, even a tropical wave or hurricane, they look to some forecasters in the United States versus, for example, some of these great folks on this panel. But in the United States, they're so focused on the kind of the endpoint for them that they just really brush over parts of the Caribbean, and therefore it's not specific enough. So I think it's important to look to folks that are focused on the Caribbean for safety's sake, like these great folks on the panel. But there are some differences. One in the number of meteorologists, but sometimes that could be a good thing. Sometimes there's a lot of noise out there in the United States with a billion meteorologists out there. But also tools is a big thing, such as weather. I wish there was more weather radars across the Caribbean, that would just simply be helpful. I hope that answered the question a little bit.
Yeah, I think it does. I guess the participant wanted to get a perspective. I guess given that you are in the U.S. and of course a very long blurb that the person said that they enjoy looking at your YouTube channel and so on, right? Okay, so let's go to another question that's via the SMS text. Although I suspect we would have addressed this somewhat, but there may be a different spin to this question. What are some of the steps or some of the various personnel involved in the process of producing the weather updates? So I know we talked a bit about what are the parameters, what you guys look at, but this question is asking what are some of these steps? So this sounds more administrative, various personnel involved, maybe how many persons does it take to do all of this? So let's go again with the question. What are some of the steps or some of the various personnel involved in the process of producing the weather updates? Would anyone like to take a stab at that question?
Okay, first let me go again first.
Yeah, Gary.
The steps, weather is information intensive, data intensive. We need to have a lot of information in order to make this very important decision. And one of the first personnel who are normally or usually overlooked in discussions like these, and people only see in the final product, but there are hardworking observers, people who are trained to observe the sky and record it. We have more technology now, and we have automatic weather stations, but we still have those human and personnel to input, to observe the data, record it, and input it into database all over the world, all over the world, and in our region, and then we would take that weather, and therefore that is how the numerical models, that is some of the data that goes into the numerical models, those that are recorded by the observer, recorded by satellites and different technologies, but also there's the observer who has to record the information at each meteorological station every hour on the hour, 24/7, 365 days a year. So I just want to shout out to those weather observers, sun, rain, or shine. They're better than postmen, because they have to go out there and do the weather observations. And when we gather all that information together, of course, the biggest client of the weather observer is the weather forecaster or the meteorologist. So we take all the information, and then the weather forecaster would produce a forecast. And then there are people who take that information, and meteorologists would produce a forecast, analyze the weather, produce all sorts of different information, and people would take that information and produce further information. For instance, like Kalain and Brian, they may produce the information in such a way on their programs that could reach the last mile, as we like to say. That could reach the last mile, or the people, in such a way that they could understand what has been done previously by the other meteorologists at the different stages. So that there's a whole train of things happening. And when we have that type of information, especially from people who know what they are about, we can have a decent product for people on the ground, the layperson, to understand what is happening with the weather as far as forecasting is concerned.
Okay, excellent indeed there, Gary. And we're getting questions fast and furious. And I'm sure we will not be able to get to all of these questions that are being asked by the participants. But we'll do a couple more. And we do have to put a wrap on the program in a few minutes. So we're not doing too badly on time. But in respect of the panelists' commitment, many of them have other things that they need to do afterwards. So we hope that the participants can understand. All right, so here's another one coming in via WhatsApp. It's, what's the difference between a weather anchor and a meteorologist? Who would like to take that?
Honestly, there really is no difference. It could be based on the job title that HR has for you, the job title that the uh, the company chooses. There really is no difference. The qualifications are the same when it comes to actually hiring somebody for the position. It just depends on what you want to call yourself. Some people who don't have like a full bachelor's of science or a master's of science of meteorology, even a PhD, don't like to call themselves a meteorologist just because they feel like they don't have full experience or full qualifications that's needed. Then you have some people who prefer the term weather anchor because it gives them a bit more flexibility to do other stuff. But when it comes to it, qualifications on paper are exactly the same.
All right. Any other panelists who would like to take a different view or add or so to that contribution from Kalain?
I would like to add something that a weather anchor could have any qualifications. Anybody who is trained in media reporting and understands the weather to a certain extent, including meteorologists, can do weather anchor. And there are meteorologists who are not adept at presenting the weather. Very excellent meteorologists are not adept at presenting the weather. But it is, in fact, two different jobs, but the qualifications could be the same. There's nothing stopping a meteorologist from working as a weather anchor, or there's nothing stopping from a weather anchor from getting into the field of meteorology and working as a meteorologist. But we are the Trinidad and Tobago Met Service. We have to be qualified according to WMO standards, the World Meteorological Organization, and we have to take some time in practical job practicals and development over time to bring ourselves up to standard to the World Meteorological Organization standards. And also we are operating in an aerodrome and airport, so we have to be up to standard with aeronautical meteorology and things like that. So we cannot work at the Met Service, the Trinidad and Tobago Met Service, unless we are WMO sanctioned and qualified. Because while we spoke earlier on about the proliferation of Facebook pages and anybody coming on the page and deciding they want to pronounce on the weather, the Trinidad and Tobago Met Service has the responsibility, they have the accountability and the authority for pronouncing on weather as far as Trinidad and Tobago is concerned. And while other organizations would have, well, at least they should have a certain amount of responsibility when they are doing their pronouncements on the weather, but we have the accountability. So you would find that anything happens with the weather in Trinidad and Tobago, you will find everybody looking back to the Met Service, especially when they believe we are wrong, to pull us through, rake us through the cold straight. And that is inherently, subconsciously in the minds of people, that we are the persons accountable. Because while other meteorologists could be wrong, and we all are wrong, I've heard people told me that if you want to be correct all the time, you're in the wrong field if you want to get into meteorology, because you will not be correct all the time. But the Met Office, because of that accountability to the nation and responsibility, are raked through the coals for any little things. So I'm just saying that we have to be WMO standard, we have to have the accountability and the responsibility, and we have to be careful of how we operate as far as our pronouncements to the nation. That is why sometimes we are very careful, and it may even lead to us understating weather situations. Because, for instance, if we look to rile up the public for every tropical wave that comes across from the African coast, every Monday morning, every 5 days, we'll be making a statement that a tropical wave is coming. And we don't really need that, or we don't really want that. We just have to understand that when it becomes threatening to us, then we would say what we have to say. So while other people can take from the get-go and say, hey, next week we're going to have bad weather, next 2 weeks, and whether it comes or not, nobody cares. The Trinidad and Tobago Met Service has to be very concerned and very accurate and very accountable for what they do.
Okay. Thanks a lot, both Kalain and Gary. And I distinctly sensing a difference. One of the things is maybe what you can say and what you cannot say, right? In the title of weather anchor versus meteorologist, right? So I heard the term flexibility there. But it's all good. So let's just probably do 2 more questions and then we will start to wrap this evening's event up. So coming in via WhatsApp, right. It was mentioned that there are 2 forecasts that goes to the ODPM in making decisions, one from the Met Services and one internal. Which one takes precedence? Okay, so
The Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service is the authority for the dissemination of all weather data to the entire all publics, including the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and they're the official uh, producers of the forecast, and we will always rely on them first of all for the data. If something were to happen and the Met could not produce a forecast for whatever reason, which is highly unlikely, but if that were to happen, then we will look at other sources of information, such as myself. Thanks.
okay, excellent. That's pretty clear there, Eric. All right. So a final question for panelists. What are some of the weather-related myths? So I'll say that question one more time. What are some of the weather-related myths? So any panelists care to take a stab at that question? Now I've heard people say, you know, once their joints, like their knee joint is hurting, rain is coming or something like that. I don't know if that's a myth though.
Some of them may not be myths, you know. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with that one, but the thing is, the Met Service has to be based on science, you see, so that even if they are myths, whether they're, because I've found out over time, if the science really drills down into it, you may have some sort of relationship. For instance, the hurting of the knee. We know that the human body is affected by the atmosphere, the different the temperatures of the atmosphere, the coldness, and we know that animals sense earthquakes and tsunamis, and some people may be more sensitive, but it cannot be. They may call them myths. I don't know, because I really don't know. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but they may call them myths. But then we have to be based on our pronouncements, be based on science, you know. But somebody on a personal level could say, "Oh, Granny knee is hurting her," and they see rain come, and it could be probably because of a biological factor with the atmosphere, because the atmosphere does in fact, we know the atmosphere does in fact interfere with the human body, affect it. Even the dust that we have in now, we know that some people, I am sensitive to the dust, but not as sensitive as other people. So that some people will be complaining of dust, and I would be saying, why are you complaining about the dust and I not feeling anything? And then next 2 days, the dust increases, and I say, oh boy, I can't breathe today too well, or I can't sleep too well because of the dust, you know. So they may or may not be myths, and then the scientists have to look into it, go down that rabbit hole themselves, and see if they could find any connection. But we, as the Met Service, have to be pronouncing on as far as the science goes.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on myths? Things that probably the public thinks, or you hear that the public is thinking that you have had to dispel. So any other myths? Weather-related myths?
I mean, there are quite a few myths, but like Gary, don't want to go down that train of, publicizing them and perhaps even, making them more widely knowledgeable. At least our audience know about them. But at least one that I know I can dispel with fact behind it is we don't have an earthquake. We don't have earthquake weather. Our hot temperatures that we experience throughout the year has no relation to the earthquakes that we experience. And to keep to preface that with the temperatures above the atmosphere and the processes that occur below the ground that causes earthquakes are so widely apart that the temperature difference needed to actually cause fault movements or cause any movement with the earth, it would melt us before that even happens. There's no relation with temperatures on the surface of the Earth and earthquakes that occur below.
You know, Kalain, if we follow those myths, you know, we could be out of a job because people people may be looking to the myths because I watch the social media being a communications meteorologist. I look at everybody, I take everybody information, I don't take it for granted, whether I agree with it or not. And people would tell you that I even heard the comment somebody say my grandmother could forecast better than the Met service because anytime the knee hurt. I've heard those comments on Facebook and different social media. So if people go that way, we can be out of a job. But just to reiterate, we, we follow the science for a term to use. We follow science and it's based on probabilities and impacts and the seriousness of the expected weather. And even though the probability might be low, we still have to state it because there's a 10% chance of a thunderstorm is a serious business if it does occur. You know, so we like Kalain, we don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. I mean, you don't want to perpetuate any of them by probably calling upon them or repeating them, right? Might give people ideas to spread. And they say it was said on a forum, you know, and you know how it goes. Social media people will just take a sound bite and say this is what was said, and that's it, right? It just runs away, right? So very very respectful of the positions there. But nonetheless, we did some explorations into a number of areas along the topic line, and of course, like every good thing, we must look to bring things to a close. So in wrapping up, what I would like to ask is each of the panelists probably to give a 2 minute or so wrap on your thoughts, and I will call you in order, just to give us, your closing thoughts around what we have discussed. Any final thoughts that you would like to leave with the viewing public as a message to them along the topic line. So let me first of all call upon Kalain for your closing remarks. Okay, Kalain, I'm not sure if you're muted.
Got it. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah. We just lost we lost your video though.
Okay. Video is up, audio is there on my end.
Okay, that's okay. We have your audio, so I think that that's fine. So please proceed again.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah. The theme today was we spoke on disaster preparedness and disaster response with regards to the weather. And as we head through the upcoming 2023 rainy season and hurricane season, we see a lot of these natural hazards play out. So it's incredibly important as we head through the next coming months, have trusted sources of credible, accurate information so that you, your family, businesses, you would be prepared and you would be able to respond appropriately when we have hazards that are incoming.
Excellent indeed. Thank you so much for your comments, closing remarks, Kalain. So up next, let's go with you, Eric.
Thank you, Robbie. Okay, well, first of all, allow me to thank yourself and React for this webinar this evening. It's a big plus for the entire National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month theme, and it has gone down very well indeed. So where the weather is concerned, as we have all more or less indicated, it looks like it may be a relatively quiet year this year. But as everyone has said, it only takes one to make it a bad year. So we gotta not let our guard down and keep our ears to the ground and eyes looking out to the east, as it were, to see when the tropical waves are going to start coming off the African coast, number one, and what sort of development is going to take place for them when they do come off. And hopefully they'll all stay out in the Atlantic and not affect us at all. But we all know that's also not very realistic. So there you go. So I would like to suggest to the viewing public that you take this time now to make sure that your surroundings are prepared for the wet and hurricane season. You want to tidy up any sorts of loose lumber or galvanized sheeting or anything like that that's just lying around in your yard. You need to take that and secure it properly somewhere so that it doesn't become a missile in strong winds. It just takes a gust of tropical storm force winds to pick up a sheet of galvanized and carry it couple hundred yards down the road. And if it hits anybody, it will do very, very serious damage. So keep that in mind. Also, have the trees on your property properly pruned and so on. Look at minimizing the risk to your roof in case a branch should break off in high wind and that sort of stuff. And then where the flooding is concerned, if you live in a flood prone area, make sure that you visit your disaster management unit of the municipality, that you reside in, and get sandbags. They'll have sandbags to give you. Get some sandbags and keep them because you don't want to be going to look for sandbags when there's a flood warning out. You need to do. You need to be able to put out the sandbags as soon as the flood warning, comes out, and not be looking to scrambling to go and see if you can get bags. You may get them too late, and then your place floods out. So be aware of that. And I think that's all I have for this evening. Thank you very much, Robbie.
Excellent indeed, Eric. Thank you. So up next, we move on to Brian for your closing remarks.
I think as Eric was saying, to reduce anxiety, it's good to get prepared early. Now, we all have different means, so not all of us could do everything that others can, but when a storm's coming, as Eric was alluding to, the anxiety gets high and things get kind of crazy. So if you could do things ahead of time, that's your best bet. But also, knowledge is power. Having these trusted sources right here, these great folks here, using them as a resource as you go throughout the season. And what I said at the beginning of this. Be there for others if you can. Think of others. Think of the person who's alone on a village or town or city over. I think that's important. Storms can be a really scary time. There's a lot of unknowns. So just to be able to be there and have that good sense of community. Think of others when a storm is coming. And thank you very, very much for having me on this panel. I'm honored.
Excellent indeed. Thank you so much, Brian. All right, well said. So for closing remarks, we come to you now there, Gary.
Okay, once again, the what I call the esteemed panelist has said a lot of what I was going to say. But anyway, what I would close with is that there are many sources out there of information. Of course, you have to, some people like entertainment, look at any channel you want to look at, but understand the esteemed sources, the accurate sources of weather information, and also the Met Office. Our information can be had at www.metoffice.gov.tt on all the social media platforms. And listen, we are not trying to hide any information from you. We are here to serve you. There are forecasters, meteorologists working at the Met Service very diligently to keep everyone safe because we all live in this country. We all live in this atmosphere. So and I also want to say to the panelists and everyone else, let us keep working together cooperatively, because at the end of the day, it is for the safety of all of us in Trinidad and Tobago, and we too as meteorologists live here. So we would not like to hide any information and put ourselves in danger also. So we are working for you. And Robbie, once again, I want to say, it is really feel honored to be asked and invited on a panel like this to give whatever information that I've learned over the years to pass it on and teach it. And so, once again, thank you, and hope everybody have a good evening and a very, very safe upcoming season.
Okay, excellent indeed. Thank you very much, Gary. So, I think the honor is mine, to have such distinguished panelists, Kalain, Eric, Brian, and Gary, with us this evening to share their expertise. I certainly had fun. It was very illuminating indeed. So, just in terms of my own closing remark, this has certainly been an engaging and illuminating conversation on the topic of the role of weather in being disaster ready. Hopefully, we have done some justice to that topic this evening. In bringing this evening's event to a close, we would like to thank the ODPM and TTMET for conceptualizing the NDPPM and putting the overall program together. Special thanks go to the CEO of the ODPM, that is Major General Retired Rodney Smart, and Operations Manager Dennis Marcel, as well as Kellan Sankar and other ODPM support staff, as well as the Director of TTMET, Alan Stewart, and support staff for their kind assistance and encouragement. A hearty thanks to the panelists, Kalain Hosein, Eric Mackie, Brian Shields, and Gary Benjamin, who have been excellent orators and have provided us with significant insight from their very wide expertise. Clearly, further discussion and exploration are warranted. Thanks to all attendees who were part of the live audience and those that fielded questions. I do apologize we weren't able to get to all of your questions. Maybe we can have a follow-up session with our panel of experts to explore further. A special thanks to our streaming provider, Hatlight TV, and its CEO, Charmaine Williams, and Technical Director, Bert Williams, and staff for making available the required technologies and facilities enabling us to host today's virtual panel discussion. Thanks to the Chairman and Board of Directors of REACT International, the Presidents and teams of REACT Trinidad and Tobago Council, REACT members and their families, fellow communicators, colleagues in the amateur radio fraternity, the Zello Communications partners, and CB radio operators for their various contributions towards making this event possible. Look out for follow-up sessions in the near future. To get in touch with REACT, please call or text to the same WhatsApp number that you have been using all evening. That's 1-868-74-REACT. You can also email us at info@ttreact.com. Check us out also on social media platforms and consider interacting with us via the public Zello channel REACT members. And we encourage you, of course, to follow all of the relevant agencies that are represented this evening. We certainly have ODPM, we have Met Services, we have Guardian Media, CNC3, and of course, we certainly have Mr. Weatherman as well. So please consider following. These are really good sources of information that we'd want to continue to keep in touch with. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Wishing that each and every one and their families continue to be safe. Do have a good night.